before I start class. I think they call it housekeeping. I took this away with me last night. This is the zapper for the present, for the screen, etc. in the Haveli. Who in the room would be most connected with the Haveli that would take that off my hands and give it back to the Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Jaya Jaya Gopi Janavallava Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Jannaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jannaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanacharyamu Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya 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 Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda A reading from Sri Caitanya-Caritāmṛta, Madhya-lilā, chapter 14. I was going to read 45, but I see we have 37 on the screen, so we'll do 37. Okay, 37. Kaya patra droni aila boja pancha sata Eka eka jane dasa dona dila eka pata Someone want to ring that or chant that in the correct meter? Oh, is it? Okay, imagine that, me making a mistake that's actually right. Okay, we'll go again. Kaya patra drona aila boja pancha sata Eka eka jane dasa dona dila eka pata Kaya patra drona aila boja pancha sata Eka eka jane dasa dona dila eka pata Kaya patra drona aila boja pancha sata Eka eka jane dasa dona dila eka pata. Kaya patra drona aila boja pancha sata. Eka eka jane dasa dona dila eka pata. Kaya patra drona aila boja pancha sata. Eka eka jane dasa dona dila eka pata. Kaya patra droni aila. Eka eka jane dasa dona dila eka pata. We're put off by the odd meter, on the second line. Ladies? Kaya patra droni aila boja pancha sata. Dona dila eka pata. Kaya patra droni. Plates made of leaves of the Caitaki tree. Aila. Arrived. Boja. In loads. Pancha sata. 5 or 7. Eka eka jane. To each and every man. Dasa dona dila. 10 such plates were given. Eta pata. So many leaf dishes. Translation, and I'll read through to 45 to the first purport. Translation. There then arrived 5 or 7 loads of plates made of the leaves of the Caitaki tree. Each man was supplied 10 of these plates, and in this way the leaf dishes were distributed. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu understood the labor of all the kirtan chanters. Therefore, he was very eager to feed them sumptuously. All the devotees sat down in lines, and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu personally began to distribute the prasadam. But the devotees would not accept the prasadam until Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took it. Sarup Goswami informed the Lord of this. Sarup Damodar said, "My Lord, please sit down to eat. No one will eat until you do." At that time, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu sat down with his personal associates and had every one of them fed very sumptuously until they were filled to their necks. After finishing, the Lord washed his mouth and sat down. There was so much extra prasadam that it was distributed to thousands. Following the orders of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Govinda, his personal servant, called for all the poor beggars who were unhappy due to their poverty and fed them sumptuously. Observing the beggars eating prasadam, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu chanted Hari Bol and instructed them to chant the holy name. In a song, Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur chants, "O people, why are you being captivated by the waves of the ocean of nescience? If you would immediately accept Lord Sri Krishna as your eternal master, there would be no chance of being carried away by the waves of illusion. then all your sufferings would stop. Krishna conducts the material world under the three modes of material nature, and consequently, there are three platforms of life: higher, middle, and lower. On whatever platform one may be situated, one is tossed by the waves of material nature. Someone may be rich, someone may be middle class, and someone may be a poor beggar. It doesn't matter. As long as one is under the spell of the three modes of material nature, he must continue to experience these divisions. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore advised the beggars to chant Hari Bol while taking prasadam. Chanting means accepting oneself as the eternal servant of Krishna. This is the only solution, regardless of social position. Everyone is suffering under the spell of Maya. Therefore, the best course is to learn how to get out of the clutches of Maya. How to do so is stated by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. One who engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. One can overcome the spell of Maya and attain the transcendental platform by agreeing to engage in the devotional service of the Lord. Devotional service begins with Shravanam Kirtanam. Therefore, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu advised the beggars to chant the Hare Krishna Mahamantra for elevation to the transcendental position. On the transcendental platform, there is no distinction between the rich, the middle class, and the poor. Om Ajanata Marandasha Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Amritamena Tasmai Shri Gurve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manustam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupam Gadamayam Dadati Swabadantikam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Oh, that's handy. The class schedule is there, telling me what time to finish. Okay. What to say? I mean, it is interesting, you know, in verse 38. Let's read the second one. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu understood the labor of all the kirtan chanters. Therefore, he was very eager to feed them sumptuously. In one sense, we're all kirtaneers. Some of us specialize, for want of a better word, in that more than others. But I think anybody who has engaged in that vigorously, whether it's Harinam Sankirtan on the streets or whether it's within our own temple environments with different kirtan programs, etc., will agree that when you've chanted for an hour, 2 hours, or however long it may be, it's a labor. There's real physical effort that goes into that activity. So when I was reading that verse, I was thinking, what to speak of something like, which may not be more physically taxing, but certainly it's more maybe mentally taxing, something like on the street doing book distribution. And you will get people, or you used to get people, maybe you don't get this so much anymore, but you used to get people who would walk past you and they would say, get a job. And I was thinking, reading that verse, you know, chanting Hare Krishna is a job, you know, it's hard work, it's a labor of love. And then what was it, text, the very next one, text 39, we have all the devotees sat in lines and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu personally began to distribute the prasadam. That reminded me of the pastime between Lord Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya when they first met. And when they first met, I think Lord Chaitanya was about 32 and Lord Nityananda was about 20. And the first thing that happened was that Lord Chaitanya, I think, started, and he wanted to worship Lord Nityananda because Lord Nityananda is none different than Lord Balaram, who's the original spiritual master. So he wanted to offer him a Vyasa Puja ceremony. And as soon as and he was gathering the paraphernalia for that, and as soon as Lord Nityananda saw what Lord Chaitanya was doing, he stopped him, and then he wanted to offer the same paraphernalia and the same Vyasa Puja to Lord Chaitanya. And then Lord Chaitanya resisted that, and then he tried to do the same again to Lord Nityananda, and this went backwards and forwards kind of many times. So again here we have Lord Chaitanya personally began to distribute the prasadam, and this principle that we all struggle with to one degree or another because we came to the material world. And we'll talk about that because it quotes the point about, you know, what mode of nature that we're under. But we came to the material world essentially because we had abandoned that that culture, that understanding, that culture of being a servant. We'd abandoned it. If we hadn't abandoned it, we wouldn't have actually come to the material world in the first place. But we did abandon it, and therefore shaking it off again. It's a little bit like they talk about alcoholics, you know, that they can be dry, they can get on the wagon, and for many weeks, months, years, they can maintain that. But then if they slip and they get back on the wagon, it can take them an eternity to actually get off the wagon again, so to speak. A little bit like us, you know. We slipped, we abandoned that culture and that understanding of being servant, come to the material world. It can be challenging to regain that status. So these examples of Lord Chaitanya distributing prasadam, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, these are the examples that we should try to follow. And I know for myself, it's like, you know, if you've gone through the full morning program and breakfast arrives, particularly if it's on a festival day or something, and there's like hundreds of devotees in the prasadam room, you know, the mental gymnastics that you have to go through to convince yourself, actually, I will serve all this prasadam, I will serve all these devotees first before I honor prasadam. And then, even if you do that, you start that process, and then someone comes along and says, oh no, bro, you said, please take prasadam, you know. And you get into this almost mock resistance, you know. You have to resist a little bit. You can't just say, oh, okay, because then you'll be totally exposed. So you get into a little bit of mock resistance that, no, I want to serve prasadam, hoping that they're going to respond and say, no, sit down there. And then it becomes a game of, a game of chicken, as they call it. You know, it's like, how many times do I resist before this devotee actually stops insisting that I sit down, you know? You want to stretch it as long as possible because then it makes you look really genuine, but you don't want to stretch it so far that he says, oh, okay, then go ahead and serve it. Anyway, so yeah, abandoning that, that mood of being the master rather than the servant, and it's been led here by Lord Chaitanya. He's showing us and leading the example, and showing us the way. And then the devotees would not accept, and this is the same thing. So that the next verse is the devotees would not accept the prasadam until Lord Chaitanya took his prasadam. So that's what was going on. And then Swarup Damodar intervened and said, no, you have to sit down, Lord Chaitanya, because nobody will eat until you do. And then he did sit down and took the prasadam. And then it says, this is text 42, he sat down with his personal associates and then had every one of them fed sumptuously until they were filled up to their necks, which is interesting in the modern context of, controlling what we eat and obesity and all these things. It certainly didn't seem to be relevant in Lord Chaitanya's time. So these pastimes, this is all part of the kind of ecstatic exchanges between Maharaj Prataparudra and Lord Chaitanya. And interesting, because earlier in this chapter, it's really amazing how Prabhupada does this. So when King Prataparudra took off his royal dress and put on Vaishnav dress, from one perspective, that's a real significant step that the king has taken. He shed his royal dress and all that resembles and all that indicates, and put on Vaishnav dress. But in the purport, Prabhupada uses that example to talk about us as devotees now. Of course, Prabhupada's writing this in the 70s, but it's still applicable today. He uses that example to say sometimes our ISKCON devotees get criticized for wearing civilian clothes when distributing books on the street. But we can see from this example, even though the example's the other way around, it's Prataparudra sort of giving up, I was going to say his civilian clothes, it's not really civilian because it's the royal dress, but still, it's comparable. He's giving up those clothes and putting on Vaishnav clothes. Prabhupada completely turns it on its head and says, however, they should not be criticized because the principle is not what we wear, but the principle of what we're trying to achieve and what we're following. And whatever works best to achieve that goal and to spread the Krishna consciousness movement, that's glorious, and that's Krishna conscious, not the external dress that we may wear. So yeah, this is all that pastime, and Maharaj Prataparudra getting that incredible mercy from Lord Chaitanya. And they sat together, didn't they, in wherever they were sitting, in that garden, and for 9 days. And then it says on one of those days, which is interesting because it reminded me of another pastime, that they talked about Lakshmi Devi, which is interesting, because we're talking about prasadam, primarily we're talking about prasadam and feeding thousands, and this incredible kind of, I think it says at one point that there was, it says that the garden, was it the garden they were in or somewhere, was the whole area that it was in was half filled with prasadam. You can just imagine, mountains and mountains of prasadam. So it's very much prasadam focused. Last night at the program I asked the audience, of course it was for drama, but I said the three real nectar things really in Krishna consciousness, it's all nectar, but three of the things. One would be dramas, that we all love to see dramas. One is kirtan, we all love kirtan, and the other is prasadam. I thought prasadam would get the biggest cheer, drama got the biggest cheer, but that was, I guess, because of the event that we were at. But prasadam, is something that the whole world can engage in. Actually, before I tell the pastime, mention the pastime that I was going to mention, now another thought has come into my mind. And this whole focus on how, let me tell that pastime first. That pastime is when, if I get it right, it's when Narada convinces, Narayan doesn't want to give his Maha, doesn't want to give his prasadam, but Narada Muni really wants Narayan's Mahaprasad, Lord Narayan's Mahaprasad. So he pleads with Lakshmi Devi to somehow or another get his prasadam. I want his prasadam, can you get me some? Interesting that Narada Muni is going through the wife, if you like, to try to convince the husband to give some prasadam. So eventually, Lakshmi Devi manages to do that, and then presents Narada with some of Lord Narayan's Mahaprasad. As soon as it touches the lips of Narada, of course he does actually end up taking it all, but as soon as it touches his lips, he just enters ecstasy and starts dancing all over the universe, doesn't know where he is or where he's going or what he's doing, but he's just dancing everywhere. And then he eventually reaches the abode of Lord Shiva, Mount Kailash. That's where he arrives. And then Lord Shiva sees him and he says, Narada, what's come over you? What are you doing? You're dancing and chanting like a madman. What's happened? What's going on? And Narada explains that, I'm just so fortunate. I have just managed to get some of the Mahaprasad of Lord Narayan. And then Lord Shiva, his first response is, do you have any for me? Is there any left? And Narada Muni then realizes, that he didn't. He was quote unquote greedy, and he took it all for himself. Transcendentally greedy, laulium. Not regular greedy. Jai Shishi Radha Gokulananda ki Jai Shishi Lakshman Sita Hanuman ki Jai Shishi Gonitai ki Jai. So the first thing Lord Shiva says is, great, have you got some for me? And then Narada Muni realizes he doesn't have any for Lord Shiva, and he has to explain that to him. And then Lord Shiva is very, very disappointed as a result at those turn of events. How many of us have been disappointed in the room when a pujari walks around with the Mahaprasadam and is distributing it and it runs out before it gets to us? Who said definitely? Ah, okay. Well, you have to leave, and you've got a pen and paper. You write 100 times, I will not be disappointed when I don't get them up, because that is Krishna's arrangement, and ultimately Krishna's in control, not me. And so, we're disappointed, if that happens. So Lord Shiva was disappointed, so he starts begging Narada Muni, and then Narada Muni, he finds this tiny little bit of prasadam still under his fingernail, is where he finds it. Now, you put your hand up, Prabhu. You put your hand up as well, Prabhu. I shouldn't point in class, right, in the temple room. But both of you I saw putting your hand up. I think others who else put the hand up when I said you're missing the Mahaprasad? If the Mahaprasad runs out by the time the Pujari is, who put the hand up?
We do it before.
Huh?
We do it before we get down there, actually.
You do what?
We do the prayers before we even get down there. So we're ready to receive.
No, I'm just asking if the Pujari is going around and with some maha and then is distributing it, but then obviously it runs out at some point and you're next in line to receive and you haven't received yet, I asked who has ever been disappointed, and I saw these two Prabhus put their hands up, but I saw other hands go up as well. Anyway, so what I'm going to ask you, because now everybody's gone shy and they're not putting their hands up again, so because I saw your two hands, then my next question is, if the devotee who has just received some looks under his fingernail and says, "Oh, look, there's a little bit of maha left. Here, Govinda." Are you going to be as transcendental as Lord Shiva? Because when that happened, Lord Shiva took that little morsel of prasad that was under Narada's fingernail, and then as soon as it touched his lips or his mouth, he entered kind of ecstasy as well, and he then was dancing just like Narada Muni. The only problem is, Narada Muni doesn't have a dance of destruction. Lord Shiva does. And then, unaware of what he was doing, he was just dancing, but then he just morphed into his dance of destruction. And then Parvati saw him and stopped him and said, "Hey, what are you doing? This is not the time for annihilation. You're doing your dance of annihilation. This is." So she stops him, thankfully, stops him from doing that dance. And then he said, "Oh, gosh, I don't know what came over me. I was just so fortunate. Narada came. He had received some of Lord Narayan's Mahaprasad, and he was in ecstasy. And then I asked him for some, and he had this tiny little morsel left, and he gave me some. And then I entered this ecstasy." And what was the first thing Parvati asked? "Did you keep some for me, your loyal wife?" Oh, no, he didn't. And then again, connected to the verse we're reading today, or the section we're reading today, because it's also around Ratha Yatra time in Puri, the arrangement was made. Parvati then pleaded with Lord Narayan and for some Mahaprasadam, and Lord Narayan agreed to come then to descend as Jagannath. And the idea is that at the Jagannath festival, and you see it every year, we right from the time the parade begins, we're throwing prasadam from the cart, etc. And then, of course, there's wonderful prasadam at the end. The idea is this principle of eternal distribution of prasadam. And I think for us as devotees, it's such a relevant thing. One, obviously, we all love prasadam, but two, it's the one thing that we do. The one single thing that we do as the Hare Krishna movement. Maybe you could argue we run courses and people will pay to come to courses. Of course, we tend to have to mask them a little bit, whatever, etc. But it's the one core activity that we engage in that the non-devotees willingly pay for via restaurants, Govinda restaurants or Prasadam restaurants. It's quite amazing. If you set up this is one of the reasons we've never done it, actually, or we don't tend to do it. Prabhupada did, but of course that's connected to Prasadam as well. In 1972, Srila Prabhupada got essentially absorbed in the idea of opening restaurants with reading rooms above them. That was his, practically every letter he wrote in 72, 73, he was mentioning this, open restaurants with reading rooms above. If you just opened a reading room, you would probably get 0 customers. Or if you did get 1 or 2, they would probably be a little odd, the people that come in. So the one thing that we do, we open a restaurant. It's one of the reasons that we open restaurants, actually, because if you go out with Food for Life distribution, it can be different in different places, but often if you go out with Food for Life distribution, you don't get that many people coming. A lot of people have a psychological block with going and getting free food. There's kind of a psychological thing. Whereas you open a restaurant, next thing, you've got hundreds of people coming every day to pay you £10, for what they, in theory, could go down, I don't know, wherever Parashuram is distributing his prashadam, they could go down and get it for free. But they don't. They come into your door and they pay for it. So prashadam is a really potent way of spreading the Krishna consciousness movement. Like, it's a super, super potent way. It kind of softens people up to us also. And obviously, if they're coming into our restaurants, they're going to get association with devotees. We'll have a reading room or a temple above or whatever the case may be. And it's really a wonderful entry level, if you like. But it's a really transcendental entry level also, because it's Krishna prashadam. So the connected story that I wanted to mention was, I'm sure we've all done this, right? We do festivals where we distribute prashadam. So this was quite a few years ago, at least 10 years ago. Anyway, we were asked if we would come to a festival. I think it was called the Knocking Stocking Festival. Can you imagine? People come up with these names, the Knocking Stocking Festival. Anyway, they were expecting thousands of people to come. So we said, no problem, we'll go along. So we went along. And we brought huge amounts of prashadam. The big 50-liter stainless steel pots. We had, literally, we were refilling them all the time. I don't know how many plates of prashadam we distributed, but we distributed literally thousands of plates of prashadam over that weekend at that festival. But eventually, similar to what we were talking about earlier, we started to run out. One of the organizers of the festival came to us. They'd come to us and they were saying, oh God, people are loving your food. I mean, your food is just off the charts. That's why we invited you, etc. So they were just glorifying. And I said, yeah, well, we've got a bit of a problem, actually. We're literally, and we've brought everything. It's too far for us to go back to, where we're based, to come back again, etc., etc. So we're really, really low. You can see what's left. So they went to a local farmer. It was in the countryside. They went to a local farmer. And they came back about half an hour later with these massive marrows, like massive marrows. The one thing we had left, by the way, was cooking oil, and we still had pakora batter. They were the 2 things that we had. So now, your favorite, is that what you're going to say? Yeah, I would say, well, yeah. Well, that's the problem, because obviously courgettes, but they grow into marrows, and these were big things, like the big things, and they're a bit tougher in the whole thing. And of course, once you dip them in batter and you deep fry them, you can hardly tell the difference, particularly when everyone's drunk at the festival. Anyway, so they brought us, I don't know, about 10 of these massive marrows. So here we were for the next, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 hours. I'm not sure exactly how long it took, but we had devotees chopping these massive marrows up into bite-sized, pakora size like that, deep fry, dipping them in the batter, deep frying them, distributing them like that. So I think for the next 2, 3, 4 hours, whatever it was, then we started running out, and that was really the end. There was no more marrows. There was nothing. We just couldn't go any further, and we still had a queue. Even though we'd gone through all these marrows and we're coming to the end of them, we still had a queue. I don't know, it must have been at least 200 people, 300 people. It's kind of hard to see. And I was getting sort of paranoid, It's kind of like, all these people are queuing. You can't have them queuing and then they get nothing. And I'm looking at what we've got left and looking at the people. We started rationing. We started off giving people 4 or 5 pakoras on a plate, and then it went down to 3 and then down to 2. And then we were just giving 1 to try to stretch out the thing as much as we could, But we were still running out. So I thought, I have to make an announcement. So I got a microphone. And I started to make an announcement. that, listen, we're really, really sorry, you know, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You know, and you could see the disappointment. I said, we've probably got enough for, I don't know, you can queue if you want, but I doubt if we have much more than maybe 50 or something like that, you know, and there was much more people. So you could see the visible disappointment of some of the people. But then one of the guys who had just got his portion of pakoras and was halfway through eating them, after I put the microphone down, he picks the microphone up. And he turns around and he says to the audience, he goes, and I'm ad-libbing, I can't remember the exact words, but he turns around and he says something along the lines of, he says, I feel so sorry for all you guys in that queue who are not going to get some of these, what are they called? Pakoras, who are not going to get some of these pakoras. I just feel so sorry for all of you. If I could just try to describe them. And he goes into this detailed description. This isn't a devotee. This is just one of the people who's just got the pakoras. He goes into this detailed description. He says, the first thing is, he says, they're really hot and they're crispy. And I can't really explain it, but when you bite into them, first off, there's an explosion of taste in your mouth. I don't know what all those tastes are, but they're absolutely divine, he says. And then when you've bitten and you've crunched on the outside batter, then you enter into this soft, succulent inside. And you're looking at the people in the queue, and they're all like, he has just totally depressed them now, you know, the people who aren't going to get any of these pakoras. And I just remember thinking, the power, when he was speaking, the power of prasadam, you know, that one, you can be serving for like 2 days, and your queue is still, you know, ginormous. And then the people who have actually, when you tell them you're running out, one of the people who has already benefited from getting some prasadam is able to actually get into that and talk in the way that they talked. So yeah, the power of prasadam, it's just absolutely incredible. We were talking last night that Prabhupada once said that England can be conquered by Krishna-conscious drama. I then asked, do you think England has been conquered by Krishna-conscious drama? And people said yes. I said, what? You must be joking. People have not been conquered yet. So we have to be better actors, which was probably not a very good thing to say at the 40th anniversary of the Bhaktivedanta Players. But we can conquer the world with prasadam. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that literally you can conquer the world and bring everybody into Lord Krishna's service by the distribution of prasadam. It's absolutely powerful. And there are so many stories, both in our ISKCON Leela, but obviously also in Lord Chaitanya's Leela, that support that premise that we literally, you know, I've never heard, people sometimes criticize us, you know, for being, I remember one time I brought a whole school, actually, a whole year of school, sorry. It was the, what do they call it when the kids miss a year? What do they call that year? Is it transition year? What do they call that? Huh? Gap year, yeah, that's right. So it was a school my kids went to, actually. Interesting school. It's called John's School. When myself and a few other devotees, grihastas, when we first got married and had children, we built our own Gurukul, actually. We just built our own Gurukul building, and we had a devotee educate our children, etc. But when they that's primary age. When you get to secondary age, it becomes much more complicated, you know, because you have to teach so many more subjects, and it's more detailed. The government want to have much more input into what you're doing, you know, all of that kind of thing. Primary is relatively easy. So it was too challenging for us to do secondary, so myself and my wife were then looking to find a suitable school. You know, and actually, ironically enough, one of the big things is what we're just talking about, prasadam, or should I say, if they go to a school where their schoolmates are eating non-vegetarian food, you know, they can feel pressure, you know, the kind of peer pressure of that. So that was a big thing. So we found this school, they're called the John Scotus School, where their school meals are vegetarian. They teach Vedic mathematics, they teach Sanskrit. They read from Bhagavad Gita at their school assemblies in the morning. They also read from the Bible and the Quran, etc., but they also read from Bhagavad Gita. John Scotus was a Christian kind of, I was going to say saint, anyway, he was a Christian who traveled to India in the 1700s, and he met followers of Sankaracharya when he was in India. And when he met followers of Sankaracharya, he became really, intrigued by Sanskrit and obviously the diet, etc. So he brought that back to the West. There's one here in London, I think maybe even two here in London, John Scotus schools. We've got Copenhagen, New York, Dublin, etc. So why did I get onto that? It was about Prasadam. What was I telling that story for? Prasadam, what was the connection? Gap year, thank you. Who said that? Thank you so much, bro. Thank you. Senior moment. Transition year, gap year, yes. So because of that, and I got to know some of the teachers there and all of that kind of stuff, and we sort of helped them in different ways over the years. So anyway, during gap year one time, one of the teachers that I was particularly close to, he asked, they were going to India. They were going to Calcutta to help with Mother Teresa's charity in Calcutta, building homes and all that, because the young guys, strong young kids, 16, 17 years of age. So I said, oh gosh, if you're going to Calcutta, you must come to Mayapur. You have to come to Mayapur. So they all came to Mayapur for a weekend. Actually, when they arrived at the Hati festival, on the Saturday evening, when the elephants are out with the deities on the elephants and the big parade, and that always happens at dusk and as it's getting dark, and it's really impressive. It's a big elephant, carrying loads of devotees. There's loads of lamps, and it's just an ecstatic kind of thing. And that's exactly when they walk through the main gate. That was when we still had the main, the original main gate. They walked through, and the procession was just passing. They were just totally blown away. Anyway, they stayed there for a few days. That gentleman in particular, I brought him out early morning. I brought him out onto the Ganges for early in the morning as the sun was rising. I was chanting japa, etc. And anyway, so they really had a wonderful, wonderful time. They thought it was absolutely amazing. He did, at least, and all the kids did. A few other adults came with them to monitor. So when they were leaving, I said, and I just bumped into two of the other teachers that I don't know so well, and I asked them what did they think, and they said, oh, everything was wonderful, except, and I says, oh, except what? And they said, I like silent meditation. You guys are very noisy. So people may criticize us for that. Sometimes you're on Harinam, and particularly if you stay stationary and you're on a shopping street, and next thing you'll get the owners of the shop coming out wanting you to move on because, you're noisy and you're blocking customers getting in. People will definitely have a problem sometimes with stopping them on the street. Sometimes people can really be quite aggressive, actually, if you do it in the wrong way and whatever. So many things that we do, people can push back against. But really, I would struggle to remember anybody ever telling me, or me ever hearing anybody experiencing, a devotee experiencing, where we give somebody some prasadam and they say, obviously, you may have the odd example maybe of some really kind of strange person, but generally speaking, it's the one thing that we do that people love, and if therefore the door is wide open. And just as one of these verses said this morning that I read, that Lord Chaitanya, look, there you go, the one that's on the screen. At that time, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu sat down with his personal associates and had every one of them fed very sumptuously until they were filled to their necks. So we should seek to do that. We should seek to fill all the non-devotees out there up to their necks with prasadam. And, I think it'll be wonderful. Okay, so just a few minutes left, just to mention, because it's mentioned in the purport that I read about the modes of nature, and that all of society is under one of those, or a combination of those modes of nature. And we also know from the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, if I can remember, Sarve Bhuteshu Yenaikam. Oh, we're getting up there, are we? No, okay. Sarva Bhuteshu Yenaikam. Don't help me, because then I'll learn, or I won't remember. Sarva Bhuteshu Yenaikam. Don't help me. bhavam avyayam ikshate, bhavam avyayam ikshate, avibhaktam vibhakteshu, tajganam vidhi sattvikam. Where it's explaining that one of the qualities of the mode of goodness is that we see the difference between the spirit, soul, and the body, and we understand that there is a spiritual spark in all living entities. But that's just the mode of goodness. That's not Sudasattva or transcendental goodness, and that's a whole... Because in essence, the impersonalists understand that too, like that. That's why it's mode of goodness as opposed to transcendental goodness. But it's certainly the platform that we should be beginning from. And I did just want to speak on that for a few moments. Srila Prabhupada gives that example of being on an Indian train. How many people have ever been on an Indian train? Okay. I remember the first time I got on an Indian train. Oh my God, you know. I really felt like I was like one of these crazy guys from the West, you know. Anyway, I couldn't believe it. What I couldn't believe was the train is so full, but you've also got people on the roof of the train, you know. You got people somehow or other sitting on the windowsills of the kind of doors of the train, you know, sort of half in and half out, you know, and just totally packed. And then, of course, the piece de resistance, as they say, is the train pulls up at a station, and more people, and as you're pulling up at the station, you're looking out at the platform, and there's like hundreds of people wanting to get on this train. You're looking, how are these people going to get on this train? Not only people, but then you have the guys selling all the snacks, you know, the big thing, big square thing coming out. How the hell is he getting on? But he gets on, and how is he going to get down these carriages? He gets down these carriages somehow or another, you know, quite amazing. So Srila Prabhupada gives the example of an Indian train, a packed Indian train. And he says, you're on a packed Indian train, and what happens is, you're sitting down, you're fortunate enough to have gotten a seat, and then you see that someone somehow or other wants to get on, a seat being a bench, and that you see that someone actually wants to now squeeze on this, and you sort of give them, you know, the death scare, you know, or death stare, sorry, you know, don't you try it, you know. And then if you do that, they're usually, if it's a family, and oftentimes it is a family, so husband, wife, you know, 65,000 children or whatever, you know, so husband and wife and children. So you give them the death stare to the husband, you know, don't try, it's just fine. So what do? Next thing, they produce their youngest kid, you know, and their youngest kid, and then it's kind of like the emotional close, you know, tiny little girl, you know, kind of got maybe a tear in her eye, you know. So, you know, somehow or another you shunt up, you know, to let the girl sit down. Then the second kid appears. Then the third, you know, then the wife, you know. The wife, you know, she's limping, you know, whatever. And before you know it, you're not sitting down anymore, you know, and this family is sitting down. So Srila Prabhupada explains that that's how Maya works. That's how Maya works. And we've got to be so vigilant, you know, we've got to be so vigilant, both from two perspectives. Don't be sucked in on emotional closes of Maya, if you like. So for instance, an emotional close could be, and even reading this verse today, an emotional close could be, the Hare Krishna movement, it's too esoteric, you know, it's too lofty. You know, I'm going to go to somewhere in Sudan and start, you know, helping with, you know, whatever, Médecins Sans Frontières or some kind of charity or whatever like that. So that's the kind of emotional thing. But the other thing is, you cannot let her in at all. Because once you let her in, Maya, she then has the upper hand. A little bit like we were talking earlier about slipping off the wagon of alcoholism, etc. So once you let her in, she's suddenly got the upper hand. And then you now are a little bit like Gajendra, and you're functioning not in your comfort zone anymore, because you've actually let Maya in the door, and then it becomes so much more difficult to get her out the door. So we just have to be so wary of all of those things. and, you know, and also assess ourselves in terms of how equipped we are to deal with it. Because you can take the life of Srila Prabhupada. If you take it, you know, when he first went to America, staying with the Agarwals, but Sally Agarwal was cooking meat, which I've always found that a little interesting, that particular thing. You know, I've never really researched it, but I've always found it a little interesting because she was married to, you know, an Indian gentleman, Dr. Agarwal, who presumably was well educated, etc. You know, so you might have thought that even if they weren't vegetarian themselves, that when they're bringing a sadhu to their home, you would have thought maybe that they would have, for the time that he was there, not done that, but they didn't. You know, so Prabhupada had to deal with that, the smell of meat being cooked in the, you know, I mean, most of us couldn't deal with that. It's an absolutely horrible kind of smell, you know. Then he had to deal with, you know, yeah, we know all the stories, you know, his dictaphone being stolen, you know. Then even times when the movement was getting started, you know, and then he'd be let down by senior devotees who would bloop or whatever the case may be, you know. So, but Prabhupada was able to withstand it all. He was able to overcome it and withstand it all. But we're not on that platform. So we have to assess, you know. I was told one time that if you get a job driving buses, they have a phrase, plan and scan, or scan and plan. So the idea being that you're always looking ahead and trying to anticipate what other people are going to do, because you're not in a little Mickey Mouse, you know, mini that you can sort of deal with very quickly and, you know, whatever. You're in a massive, big bus, double-decker thing, you know, so you have to be really, so you always have to be scanning and planning. And I think for us in the material world, we always have to be scanning and planning. Ensuring that, you know, what the potential challenges are, how well we are equipped for those challenges, and that we don't just blindly do things that may put us in a vulnerable position. And it is 8:43. I'm going to stop there so that I don't go over the 8:45 deadline that is right in front of me. But if anybody has any questions or any comments, you're most welcome. And as I'm not looking right now, if someone has their hand up, please just speak. Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Because nobody wants to ask anything. So, in regard of, thank you very much, so much, Prabhu, for this class. Regarding Mahaprasadam and this wonderful pastimes, so Lord Shiva and Narada, and then picking up those examples here, how enthusiasm for that prasadam is not on that caliber. I would just say that because, this is my case, I don't believe that prasadam offered to me is actually directly tasted by Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because I would know, let's say, for example, Pujari is offering whatever, Bhoga, and suddenly you see from Goloka Vrindavan, Krishna descends and eats that. Then if somebody would offer me remnants, even if it's behind his nail, I would explode from ecstasy. I'm sure everybody else. I mean, like, can you imagine that? So I just can envision this ecstasy of Shiva and Brahma because they know that. They know that. So how to arrive to that? Like, any tips, any... Of course, you will say that Chanda Hare Krishna, I accept that, but like any view on that?
I think to some degree, you kind of answered your own question there at the beginning. If I understood you correctly, you said that because you don't, did you say because you don't believe that this has been personally tasted? Yeah. So that's the answer to the question. We have to get to that level whereby we do believe that. I've kind of got to the stage in my life, I suppose, where I'm kind of happy now to accept on blind faith essentially anything that Srila Prabhupada has spoken. I'm kind of at that stage, you know, because it's kind of like, why not? You know, that phrase in English of hedging your bets. You know, why would I doubt when Prabhupada says that? You know, and what's the benefit of my doubting? Well, actually, there is one benefit of doubting, that the idea being that, because Arjuna had doubts, and therefore then he engaged in conversation with Krishna to have his doubts removed. So that's okay to help. And in essence, that's your question, really, I suppose. But yes, my answer would be, it's true. We take Mahaprashadam. We don't find ourselves dancing in ecstasy and exploding or whatever. Although having said that, because that was... that guy that I talked about at that festival, he was pretty much doing that, and he wasn't a devotee. Now, you can put that down to, he was really, really hungry, and now he's getting some really tasty hot food, But still, I think there would also be some transcendental element involved in that. But it is true. It's a gradual process, as Prabhupada told us all the time. If someone is selling salt, another example Prabhupada gave, if someone is selling salt, you'll have lots of customers because it's cheap. If someone is selling diamonds, you don't have so many customers because there's only a handful of people that can actually afford it like that. So it isn't cheap. It isn't a cheap process to achieve prema bhakti. And from my perspective, the plateau that we talk about, that, when you first join, and you do, that's another good example, at least it's a good example for me. I can remember, being in the temple room this morning when Prabhu was chanting very nice. Was that you that was chanting Guru Puja this morning? Very nice Guru Puja this morning. I was thinking, I feel like dancing. And then I thought to myself, but it's really clammy today. If I start dancing, I'm going to be saturated. I'm going to immediately, before I give class, I'm going to have to go and have a shower and change clothes, etc., etc. So I thought, I'll hold off on the dancing, for today. When I first joined the movement, I particularly remember we had a temple in a place called Wellington Park in Belfast, because it was just one of the places that we just used to have these ecstatic kirtans at the weekend. And literally, we actually, I think, were trying to bang our heads off the ceiling. But it wasn't difficult. The attempt wasn't difficult because we just were so much in ecstasy with the kirtan and dancing. And then I can remember some of the prasadam parties that we would have had also in that temple, as it happens, And, gulab jamun eating contests and whatever else are going on, and prasadam fight and so many things. And I can still remember it so vividly, just between the kirtans and the prasadam. It was just ecstasy. And I don't think it was any different than the descriptions or that pastime of Lord Narayan, or at least it wasn't significantly different. It really felt like that you were in ecstasy. Then that was kind of taken away to some degree, and it's kind of like, my understanding is that Krishna, Prabhupada, whatever the previous acharyas, they give you that taste because we are doubting Thomases. There's no doubt about it. We're definitely doubting Thomases. So how to keep us on track without it becoming cheap? Because if it all just comes and stays for the whole time, it kind of does become cheap then, or whatever, So how to do that? So it seems to me, when we first engage with the process, Krishna, Prabhupada, the previous acharyas, they do that. They actually give you almost, I don't doubt it's not the topmost taste, but they definitely give you a taste of spiritual ecstasy. And then they say to you, now you work for it so as that the next time you experience it, it will be a constant in your life. So how many of us in the room, just as a matter of interest, when I was describing those kirtans and that prasadam when I was a bhakta, how many in the room would relate to that when they first joined, there was some real sense of, wow, this is really something. Something's happening to me that I never got before from watching, I don't know, some big movie or some football game or drinking or taking drugs or whatever. This is something. There's something special about this experience that I'm receiving right now. And as I say, generally, when we first joined, does anybody relate to that? You do relate to that. Great. Pardon?
When Chalupa was taking the
Yeah, that's right. Come back to Tribhuvanath, all is forgiven. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, to be honest with you, and your point is well taken, and he was a wonderful devotee and a wonderful kirtaneer, etc. But I wouldn't even remember the devotees that were leading the kirtan with those experiences that I'm talking about. I just remember the experience, and just being totally absorbed in it and totally into it, and I didn't want it to end, and I wasn't thinking about anything else. I was just right there that's a new modern day parlance, right? Be in the moment. I'd never heard that phrase back in the early 80s, be in the moment, but I was in the moment, at that point in time. So, yeah, I think that's what happens, and we hit that plateau. And that's understood because we have to get rid of these anarthas. They're not easy to get rid of. Well, they're simultaneously easy and difficult. They're easy, we just engage in the process and sincerely engage, and they will be removed. But at the same time, they have been with us since time immemorial. So rooting them all and going through the 9 stages of bhakti, getting to the level of prema bhakti. Again, if that came easy, then we'd all be doing it, and we'd all be, whatever. We have to learn how to get out of this material world. We've been given a taste of what the spiritual ecstasy is. And here's another thing, Prabhu. I don't know how long you've been in the movement, how long you've been around, but I think you've been around quite some time, because I know I've seen you many, many times over the years. So you've been around a long time. So and looking at you, you look like you're a little younger than me, but you're still, you're not a spring chicken anymore. So we've gotten that taste in our early connection with Krishna consciousness. We get that real intense taste. So we know it's there. We know it's not an illusion. It's there, it exists. And we even still may get some fleeting touches of it from time to time too, depending on our level of engagement, etc. So we've had that taste. We know it's there. We know it's real. We know it exists. Simultaneously, while we know it's difficult to get back there, and we're kind of stuck on that plateau, and however long that plateau is, but of course, a plateau is only as long as it is long. And it appears to be very long. But as soon as you get to the end of it, it's irrelevant. It's over. You've crossed over it. So who knows, It could be later today, next week, next month, next year, but that plateau will come to an end. But simultaneously, understanding that, having tasted the ecstasy, the other thing that's happening to us all is we're getting older. We're suffering more. Whatever the suffering might be in terms of health, physical health, and restrictions things that you can't do. So we know that where's the nectar in that? So yeah, I think it's kind of having faith, as I say, even if it's blind faith, but having faith in the words of Srila Prabhupada, the words of the previous acharyas, having faith in Shastra, that yes, we will one day. And the only obstacle to it being today is us, in terms of our full engagement. Because, I'll be perfectly honest, I've been trying to practice this process for, more than 40 years. And I still clearly know that I haven't lifted my second foot out of the material world yet. There's still this hedging going on that, yes, I don't want to leave Krishna consciousness. I want to advance in Krishna consciousness, etc., etc. But there's still this apprehension to completely dive in and let everything go, So as long as that apprehension is there, I can't expect to be experiencing these, higher ecstasies that the pure devotees are experiencing. But I have full faith that the ecstasies exist and these pure devotees exist. So let me convince myself to lift that foot fully out of the material world and dive completely into the process of Krishna consciousness that I have been threatening to do for 4.5 decades or whatever it is, but still, for whatever reason, haven't quite got to that. So the problem is ultimately with us, And actually, it's interesting because if I was speaking to non-devotees now, because you're shaking your head in agreement. If I was speaking to non-devotees now, they wouldn't agree. And the reason they wouldn't agree is because they have not yet been given that experience of ecstasy, spiritual ecstasy, that we have been so fortunate to receive. So yeah, what can I say other than stick with the process? Please.
Actually, it's from Shakespeare. It says, our doubts, they are traitors. They cause us to lose that good we may achieve by trying.
Say it again, Prabhu. Just say it again.
Our doubts, they are traitors. They cause us to lose that good that we may achieve by trying.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Prabhu. That's amazing. You know, that, by the way, could be the definitive mantra for people leaving the service of Krishna, for leaving Krishna consciousness. Say it again, Prabhu. I really like that. Say it again.
Our doubts, they are traitors. They cause that good we may achieve by trying.
Where's that from?
It's Shakespeare.
Yeah. No, do you know where it's from? Which one?
I'm not sure. It may be Macbeth, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to quote Shakespeare now as well. Another one. The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as gentle rains from the heavens above. It is twice blessed. And we see that in what we were reading today, you know, the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. Well, not quite what we were reading, but earlier in that chapter with the mercy that he displayed to King Prataparudra. But the quality of mercy is not strained. It's unlimited. It is completely, it droppeth as gentle rains from the heavens above. All this ecstasy, all this mercy is freely available to us. We just have to want it. And yes, there may be a few little conditions attached. You may want it, and then you may have to give up a few things. But if we understand how incredible it is, and we develop that, we talked earlier about greed, that lolium for it, then giving up those things will become so easy. And the example we're giving about, you know, crossing over the material world is as easy as stepping over a cow's, footprint like that. You know, so our desire, our understanding that it exists, we have that because we already tasted it. Our desire to have it again, it's been taken away from us, but I want it again. I want it again. And be greedy for it. Be greedy for it, you know. And, you know, engage in a conversation with the super soul, you know, please don't make so worry, you know, but show the super soul, show Krishna that you actually do really, really want it. Yes, he's going to push back, you know, in whatever way, but he's going to push back. Yeah, well, you have to give up this little attachment you got, or that little attachment you've got. But yeah, so if we really want it, we'll get it, and we'll be willing to make whatever sacrifice we have to make. Thank you, and thank you for that Shakespearean quote. Absolutely wonderful. Srila Prabhupada ki, Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Sri Caitanya-Caritāmṛta ki, Go Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol. Oh, yeah.